My parents said my brother deserved everything because he was the legacy. Then he begged me to save him from a debt he didn't understand. On eviction day, he asked, "Where's the bank?" So I held out my hand and took the. My brother looked past me, searching for someone else. "The bank representative is supposed to be here," he said. I held out my hand. "I know. Give me the keys." At first, he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because his brain needed one more second before it broke. Then his face changed. His mouth opened a little. His eyes moved from my hand to my face, then back to my hand. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I said, "The company that owns your debt? The one foreclosing on the house? That's mine." That was the moment everything went quiet before it exploded. But this didn't start on that driveway. It started years earlier at Thanksgiving, when my parents calmly explained that I was useful enough to handle their estate, but not worthy enough to inherit any of it. We were sitting around the dining room table after dinner. My father tapped his glass and said he and my mother had finished their estate planning. I didn't react at first. It sounded normal. Uncomfortable, but normal. They were getting older. They liked paperwork. They liked control. They liked making decisions quietly, then presenting them like everyone else had already agreed. Then my father said the house would go to Brandon. All of it. The house, the remaining accounts, the cars, the valuables, everything that made up what they loved calling the family legacy. I waited for my name. It never came. I asked, "So what am I getting?" My mother reached over and patted my hand. That hand pat did more damage than yelling ever could have. It was gentle, almost sweet, like she was comforting me for being unreasonable. "You've always been independent," she said. "Your brother needs the foundation more than you do." I stared at her. My father leaned back and added, "Brandon carries the name. That matters." I said, "So I'm being cut out because I'm a woman?" My mother's smile tightened. "Don't make it ugly." That was her favorite trick. Say something ugly, then act offended when someone named it. My Aunt Carol looked down at her plate. My Aunt Beth took a slow sip of wine. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody defended me. That was how I knew this had already been discussed without me. Brandon shifted in his chair and mumbled, "It's not like you need it." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. My younger brother, who had been rescued from every bad decision since childhood. Failed classes became learning differences. Broken curfews became boys being boys. Debt became temporary pressure. Lies became stress. Every mistake he made got wrapped in softer language until it barely looked like a mistake anymore. And now he was sitting there, embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to refuse a whole estate. Then my father said the part that almost made me laugh. He wanted me to act as executor. Unpaid. He said, "You understand numbers. You can help Brandon keep everything organized when the time comes." I asked, "So he gets everything and I get the work?" My father's jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic." My mother said, "We trust you." That should mean something. It did mean something. Just not what she thought. I felt something inside me go very still. Not numb exactly. More like a door closing. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask them to love me fairly, because there was something humiliating about begging for fairness from people who had already decided you were less important. So I smiled. I said, "Okay. If I'm supposed to help later, I should understand what I'll be dealing with." My father looked relieved. My mother looked proud of herself. Brandon looked like he had just dodged an uncomfortable conversation. The next week, my parents gave me access to the estate documents and financial records. That was when I learned the legacy was mostly smoke. The house was beautiful, but it was buried under a large home equity loan. My parents had used it to fund the kind of life they wanted people to think they naturally had. Country club fees. Renovations they couldn't afford. Trips they described as family traditions, even when they were paid for with borrowed money. The accounts were thinner than they had implied. The cash was almost gone. And then there was Brandon. He had drained them for years. At first, it looked like ordinary help. A payment here. A transfer there. A short-term loan that was never repaid. Then I found the bigger mess. Business loans for ideas that barely existed. Credit lines. Personal guarantees. Late fees. Legal notices. And gambling debts hidden behind vague transfers with descriptions like consulting, travel, and private repayment. My parents knew. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. They knew the son they were handing everything to couldn't manage money, and that was exactly why they wanted me nearby. I wasn't their heir. I was their safety net. The quiet daughter who would keep the son from embarrassing the family after they were gone. I should have walked away. That would have been the clean thing. The healthy thing. The thing people tell you to do when they don't understand what it feels like to be erased at your own family table. Instead, I waited. I told myself I was only watching. I told myself I wasn't planning anything. But after that Thanksgiving, every family dinner felt different. Every compliment sounded like an insult wearing perfume. My mother would say, "You're so practical. That's what I love about you." What she meant was, "You don't need protecting." My father would say, "Brandon has big potential." What he meant was, his failure still matters more than your success. My aunts would corner me in kitchens and tell me not to be bitter. Aunt Carol once said, "Men just feel responsibility differently." I asked her, "What responsibility?" She said, "You know what I mean." I didn't. Or maybe I did, and that was worse. For a while, nothing happened. Brandon kept acting like the future owner of the house. My parents kept pretending debt was just a temporary inconvenience. I kept reviewing documents whenever they asked, quietly learning where every weakness was. Then Brandon called me one night, breathing so hard I thought someone had died. He asked if I could meet him. I found him sitting in his car outside a closed coffee shop, shaking. Not sad. Not ashamed. Terrified. He said he had made a mistake. With Brandon, that could mean anything from a parking ticket to a financial disaster. This time, it was worse. He owed money. A lot of it. Around $150,000. Some of it came from gambling. Some from private lenders. Some from a business loan he had no realistic way to repay. Then he admitted he had signed something using our father's name. I stared at him through the windshield light. "You forged Dad's signature?" He snapped. I didn't think of it like that at the time. I almost laughed because that was Brandon's whole life in one sentence. He never thought of anything like that at the time. He only understood consequences when they arrived at his door with teeth. He said our parents couldn't help. Not this time. They had no cash left. The banks wouldn't touch him. He needed money fast, and he needed it quietly. Then he said, "You know people, right?" There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. A request. I asked, "Why are you telling me?" He looked at me like I was being difficult on purpose. "Because you're good with this stuff." This stuff. Fraud. Debt. Panic. Cleanup. I said, "You need a lawyer." He said, "I need money." I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel. I kept hearing my mother's voice from Thanksgiving. "Your brother needs the foundation." I kept seeing my father's expression when he said Brandon carried the name. That was when the idea stopped being a thought and became a plan. I did not lend Brandon money from my personal account. I did not hand him a check and ask him to be better. I knew better than that. I formed an LLC through proper channels and used a private broker so my name stayed out of it. The company offered Brandon the money he needed. The terms were harsh, but clear. He would receive the $150,000. In exchange, he signed a secured promissory note, a personal guarantee, and an assignment tied to any proceeds or property interest he received from the estate. If he defaulted, the company could collect against that inheritance when it became legally his. He had a lawyer available to him. He did not use one. He was desperate, arrogant, and convinced future Brandon would solve it. That was always his religion. Future Brandon would pay the bill. Future Brandon would fix the lie. Future Brandon would become the man our parents kept describing. Present Brandon signed. He didn't even ask who owned the company. The money saved him from the immediate disaster. The worst legal threat faded. My parents never knew the full truth, or if they did, they chose not to say it out loud. And Brandon never made a single payment. Not one. The interest grew. Notices were sent. He ignored those too. He probably believed the lender would eventually settle, or disappear, or become another problem someone else would handle. That was the thing about my brother. He didn't think rules were fake. He thought they were for other people. 2 years passed like that. My relationship with my parents became polite and hollow. My mother still called me when she needed something explained. My father still spoke to me like I was an employee he could trust but not promote. Brandon drifted between big plans and quiet disasters. Then my parents died in a car accident. I wish I could say I felt nothing, but that would be a lie. Grief is strange when the people who hurt you also raised you. It doesn't arrive clean. It comes mixed with childhood memories, old anger, guilt, relief, and shame for feeling relief. I cried in the shower where nobody could see me. I stared at my phone expecting my mother to call about flowers or documents or some small problem she wanted me to fix. I hated them. I missed them. I wanted an apology that would never come. The will said exactly what they said it would. Everything to Brandon. I was named executor. For a moment, standing in a lawyer's office with the documents in front of me, I almost refused. I almost said let him drown in the mess alone. But then I thought about how carefully they had designed my role. They wanted me close enough to serve, not close enough to belong. So I did the job. I did it cleanly. Probate opened. Debts came forward. The home equity loan swallowed most of what was left. Accounts were drained to settle obligations. Creditors were paid in order. The pretty story my parents had told the world collapsed into numbers on paper. In the end, the house was the only real asset left. Brandon acted like that meant he had won. Before the transfer was even fully complete, he started talking about renovations. He moved his pregnant girlfriend, Megan, into the house. Aunt Carol and Aunt Beth moved in too, claiming they were helping him preserve the family home. Really, they were enjoying the fantasy that the old order had survived. They walked through rooms choosing paint colors. They talked about restoring the porch. They referred to the guest rooms as family space, like the house had become some sacred temple to my parents' memory. I watched them do it. At one point, Aunt Beth told me, "This is what your mother would have wanted." I said, "I know." She smiled, thinking I meant it as surrender. I meant it as confirmation. When the deed finally transferred into Brandon's name, the debt my LLC held became enforceable against his interest in the property. My attorney handled everything. Notices were sent. Deadlines passed. Brandon ignored the first one, then panicked at the second. That was when he called me. I was in my kitchen making coffee when his name lit up my phone. He sounded wrecked. He said some predatory lender was trying to take the house. He said the terms were insane. He said they were claiming he owed more than $250,000 because of interest, penalties, and default fees. He said it was unfair. I let him talk. Then he said, "Can your attorney look at it? Or someone you know? I think they're trying to scam me." I closed my eyes. For one small second, I almost told him. Not because he deserved warning, but because part of me wanted to hear his voice change. I wanted the satisfaction early. Instead, I said, "Did you sign the documents?" He hesitated. I was under pressure. "That's not what I asked." He got angry then. "Why are you acting like this? This is our parents' house." I said, "It's your house now." That's what everyone wanted. He hung up on me. After that, the family machine turned on. Aunt Carol called me cold. Aunt Beth said I had a duty to help. Megan sent me a long message saying she didn't know the history, but a baby was coming, and surely I didn't want my niece or nephew homeless. That one got to me more than I expected. Not enough to stop, but enough that I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time before deleting the message. Because that was the ugliest part. Innocent people were being dragged through Brandon's choices. But I had been dragged through them too, quietly, for years. I had been expected to sacrifice because I was stable, because I was responsible, because I could survive disappointment better than he could survive consequences. That expectation had followed me my whole life. Be understanding. Be helpful. Be the bigger person. Be the daughter who doesn't need anything. At some point, being the bigger person starts feeling like being the easiest person to rob. The foreclosure process moved forward. Brandon tried to fight it, but the documents were valid. He had signed. He had defaulted. The company had followed the terms. My attorney kept me updated, and I stayed behind the curtain. When the eviction notices went up, my family finally understood that no one was coming to rescue him. They didn't understand why. Not yet. The morning of the eviction, I woke up before my alarm. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and listened to my own breathing. I expected to feel excited. I didn't. I expected to feel guilty. I did, but not in the way people probably want me to. I didn't feel guilty for taking the house. I felt guilty for not feeling worse. By the time I drove over, the moving truck was already there. Boxes were stacked near the porch. Megan was crying quietly, one hand resting on her stomach. Aunt Carol was on the phone, telling someone I had abandoned the family. Aunt Beth stood by the front steps with her arms crossed, looking at the house like grief belonged only to her. Brandon saw me and walked over fast. For 1 second, he looked relieved. That almost made me laugh. He thought I had come to save him. He said, "I'm glad you're here. This is insane. The representative is supposed to be here any minute." I looked at the house. At the porch where my mother used to pose us for holiday photos. At the windows my father used to brag about. At the front door Brandon had probably imagined opening for the rest of his life as proof that he had become exactly what they said he would. Then I looked back at him. "I know," I said. "Give me the keys." He blinked. "What?" "I'm the representative." The air changed. Aunt Carol stopped talking. Aunt Beth turned toward us. Megan looked up from the curb. Brandon stared at me like I had spoken in another language. I said, "The company that owns your debt is mine. You borrowed the money. You signed the agreement. You defaulted. The house was collateral once it transferred to you. This is the collection." He shook his head slowly. No, you can't do that. I already did. His face went red, then pale. You tricked me. You didn't ask who the lender was. You didn't read carefully. You didn't make payments. You didn't get a lawyer. I didn't force your signature. Aunt Carol started screaming first. She called me evil. She said my mother would be ashamed. Aunt Beth said I had destroyed the family over jealousy. Megan cried harder, and that was the only part that made me look away. Brandon stepped toward me and shouted, "This was mine." I said, "It was never yours. It was handed to you because they thought being born male made you more deserving." He said, "You're sick." Maybe I am. I've thought about that more than people would believe. But in that moment, standing on the porch of the house I had been told I didn't deserve, I didn't feel sick. I felt calm. Brandon tried to keep arguing, but there was nothing left to argue with. The officers on site did their job. My attorney handled the formalities. The keys ended up in my palm, heavy and cold. My brother looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as his sister. Not as the person who fixed things. Not as the quiet one who would step aside. As someone capable of hurting him back. I didn't move into the house. People seem surprised by that, like revenge is only real if you sit in the throne after taking the castle. But I never wanted to live there. That house was never home to me. It was a stage where my family performed importance and called it love. A few months later, after the legal dust settled, I sold it to a developer. The family lost their minds all over again. My aunts posted long dramatic messages about legacy, betrayal, and my parents' memory. Cousins I barely spoke to called me greedy. People who had watched me get cut out of everything suddenly had strong opinions about family loyalty. The developer demolished the house not long after. I went to see it once before it came down. I stood across the street and looked at the porch, the windows, the roofline, all of it. I expected some big emotional moment. Maybe grief. Maybe victory. Instead, I felt tired. That house had swallowed so much of my family's truth. It held every fake holiday smile, every whispered insult, every lesson that taught me love came with rank. My parents worshipped that place because they thought it proved something about us. In the end, it proved exactly what I already knew. A house can look solid and still be rotting underneath. Brandon now lives in a small apartment with Megan. He has a job he hates and bills he can't ignore anymore. From what I hear, Megan stayed, at least for now. I don't know if that makes her loyal or trapped. Maybe both. My aunts don't speak to me. Most of the extended family blocked me. Every few months, someone sends a message through a relative saying I should apologize, or at least admit I went too far. I haven't. I used the money to secure my own future. Not to show off. Not to play rich. I paid off my condo, invested carefully, and made sure I would never have to depend on anyone who thought I was valuable only when I was useful. Some nights, I still think about my parents. I wonder if my mother would have understood, even for 1 second, what she created. I wonder if my father would still say Brandon needed the foundation more than I did. I wonder if either of them ever realized that by teaching me I would get nothing, they also taught me not to wait for permission. People say I stole my brother's birthright. But a birthright is just a story people tell when they want inheritance to sound moral. He was given every advantage. He signed the debt. He ignored the payments. He trusted the world to bend because it always had. I just stopped bending. Maybe I set the trap. Maybe I waited too patiently. Maybe I could have warned him before the final door closed. I know that. I'm not pretending I was kind. But my family built a system where Brandon got the house, the money, the sympathy, and the excuses, while I got the responsibility of cleaning up the mess. All I did was use the only thing they ever respected. Paperwork. So now they call me cruel. They call me jealous. They say I destroyed my parents' legacy. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just revealed what that legacy always was. I still have the old front door key in a drawer. It doesn't open anything anymore. The house is gone. The family is gone, at least the version of it I used to pretend existed. Sometimes I pick up that key and feel the weight of it in my hand, and I remember my brother on the driveway asking where the bank was. I remember holding out my hand. And I remember, for once, taking exactly what they thought I was too quiet to claim.